We have 1,700 people a day dying. The promise of putting hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into chasing genes and targeted precision medicine and all this kind of stuff is not coming to fruition. Cancer is killing more and more people. And we're doing all this stuff. And with the stuff that we're doing is based on a flawed theory. And our Aboriginal ancestors rarely, if ever, got cancer. In fact, Albert Schweitzer, the humanitarian, couldn't find 40,000 Africans. He couldn't find any cancer that were living according to their traditional ways. We can't find any cancer cells that can grow without fermentation energy, which is driven by the sugar glucose and the amino acid glutamine. Every time I see a bald-headed person who's been treated for cancer, I say the person who's treating them has very little knowledge about the biology of the disorder they're treating.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching our videos. If you'd like to support us some more, you can explore our homemade natural skincare products at purelytallow.com. Thank you so much for supporting my small business.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Carnivore Revolution. I'm Serena, and my guest today is Dr. Seyfried. Dr. Seyfried is a cancer specialist, a cancer scientist, and I'm really glad to have you here today, Dr. Seyfried. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, thank you, Serena. It's nice to be here.
And I think this is a really important conversation because I would say that every person who is listening to this or watching this has been touched by cancer, with more than 1,700 people dying every day.
Yes, I agree.
So tell us first how this happened, how you became interested in studying and helping people fight cancer.
Well, as I said in some of these shows before, it wasn't our intention at the beginning to get into this space, I guess you can call it. But the research took us here, and we have been researching the metabolism of cancer now for quite some time. I wrote a book on this, Cancer as a Metabolic Disease, on the origin, management, and prevention of cancer, based on the research that we had done here at Boston College and decades of research in the field of epilepsy and ketogenic diets. So it became just a crossover of fields before we realized that Otto Warburg had defined the nature of cancer 100 years ago. Descriptions of the abnormal metabolism in cancer is what we have also seen in no uncertain terms. There are some things that we're clearing up about what Warburg had found and modernizing a lot of what he originally did. But the bottom line is that we can't find any cancer cells that can grow fermentation energy, which is driven by the sugar glucose and the amino acid glutamine, meaning that most cancers have a common problem. They need a fermentation energy that's energy without oxygen, and that clearly tells us the path for the best management and also prevention of cancer. So once you know that, the path forward becomes very clear on how to do this. The problem is that you have an industry, both academic, pharmaceutical industries, that are still locked onto the fact they think that cancer is a genetic disease, which it's not. And then you have all of the so-called treatments and procedures that are all linked into that view. It's very hard to change in a dogmatic ideology and indoctrination of both industry and academics to change the path. But eventually it will move into the right direction. It just takes time.
So what does it mean that cancer is a metabolic disease? What does that mean?
It means that it's how they get, and everything comes back to energy. Without energy, nothing can grow. How does the cancer cell get energy? Then it comes back to metabolism, how you generate energy from nutrients. So we eat food, we breathe oxygen. All right. So otherwise we'd be dead. We get energy from oxidative phosphorylation. That's why we breathe air and we breathe oxygen in the air. And that allows us to capture the energy and the carbon hydrogen bonds of the foods that we eat. Those carbon hydrogen bonds originally produced from the energy of the sun. We have a method within our cells that breaks carbon hydrogen bonds using oxygen to facilitate this process. Cancer cells don't do that. They can live without oxygen. So how do they live without oxygen? And the answer is they use ancient pathways of fermentation, which are the pathways that were used by all living things on the planet before oxygen came into the atmosphere 2.5 billion years ago. So the cancer cells are simply falling back on these ancient pathways, and they don't need oxygen. That's one of the great differences between normal cells and cancer cells. The normal cells need oxygen to live and survive, where cancer cells use an ancient pathway of fermentation. So people say, well, then what's the energy for fermentation? And we have interrogated these tumor cells up and down, and they can't live without the sugar glucose or the amino acid glutamine. So that tells us if we take away glucose and glutamine, they become vulnerable to death, and they can't transition to fatty acids or ketone bodies because that requires oxygen, and they don't use oxygen. So it becomes now a straightforward way to kill the tumor cells without harming the body, the strategy that will work and will eventually become the standard of care. It's just that we're locked into a big standard procedure that makes it hard to move that.
Some people believe that there is some sort of big conspiracy theory that they want to keep us sick, whoever they are. I find that hard to believe. But if these things are true, if we can kill cancer cells by starving them of glucose and glutamine, then why isn't this common knowledge? Why aren't we treating it like that here?
Well, it's because of the ideological dogma. Why do you think a devout Christian could not accept Islam as the true religion, or vice versa? That's called dogma. It's an effect on the brain. It took many hundreds of years for the Catholic Church to realize that the earth was not the center of the solar system. They claimed it was the earth. They didn't recognize that it was the sun. And if you challenged the dogma and the authority of power, you would be burned at the stake like they did to Bruno. That's because the dogma said the earth was the center of the solar system. If you challenged it like Galileo, you were house arrested. And if you challenged it like Bruno, you were burned at the stake. Eventually, it was realized that no, the sun is in fact the center of the solar system. And the advancement of knowledge happened that way. Now we're locked into the ideology that cancer is a genetic disease. And we've spent hundreds of billions of dollars on the cancer genome projects. We're spending millions and millions of dollars on new cancer therapies, immunotherapies, and all of these things. Those are the products of the genetic theory of cancer. But if cancer is not a genetic theory, it's not a gene-linked phenomenon, then all that stuff will never be optimal. And that's what we're seeing. That's why we have 1,700 people a day dying. The promise of putting hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into chasing genes and target and precision medicine and all this kind of stuff is not coming to fruition. It's not that they ignore a lot of it or say, well, if all of these big medical schools and all of these academic centers say cancer is a genetic disease, how could it be possible that all these people are wrong? And the fact is, I don't know if they don't want to accept it. It's not profitable to accept it. There's a lot of reasons. We've had some distinguished scientists say that if we're right that cancer is a metabolic disease, we'll have to overturn almost everything in the field, and therefore it can't be. Well, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's called ideological dogma. It's like a religion. It's like a political affiliation. These are dogmatic views and the way they affect the rational mind. The bottom line we have here is the resistance to accepting cancer as a metabolic disorder driven by fermentation. So if the people are okay and comfortable with the progress that we're making, stay the course. If they're not comfortable with the progress we're making, they might want to reconsider why they go to hospitals and get poisoned and radiated. They're not offered alternative therapies, and the beat goes on. 1,700 people. That's almost, in an hour, we have almost 70 people dead in an hour from cancer across the United States. The failure to recognize this disorder as a metabolic disorder is ultimately responsible for the fiasco and the crisis that we have right now.
So they bring you in, they give you radiation and chemotherapy to kill the cancer cells, and then they feed you orange juice and a cookie and run glucose through the lines to clean out the lines before they send you home.
And that's to the lack of knowledge. These are not bad people. The outcome is obvious when you don't know what the nature of the disorder is. You treat people in a very inappropriate way.
I've heard a lot of people talk about how they're really tired after chemotherapy. So they go in a couple of days later to get what they call fluids, which is some glucose water, some electrolytes. It's more sugar that they're giving them to give them energy after they have had the chemo. Once again, you're going to the hospital to do that and going to a cancer center, and then they're just feeding the cancer, right?
And when you tell them that, they get angry sometimes. How is it possible that the patient might know this and the very caregiver doesn't know that? So what do you think the response is going to be? A person not trained in the profession telling the trained professional that what they're doing could be harmful. Same thing with the biopsies. There's so many scientific articles written on biopsy spreading cancer throughout the person's body. Why would you do that if you know that it would be harmful to the patient? And why are you taking the biopsy in the first place? And just do metabolic therapy and it will either shrink away or get really small, and then you can just do a small surgical procedure and get rid of it. So there's a lot of things we're doing that we really don't need to do, and many things that are being done that actually are potentially harmful to the patient without being recognized as being harmful.
So how do we teach them? How do we get to a point where people like you who know this and know that sugar feeds cancer cells, and I knew that long before I became a carnivore, that sugar feeds cancer cells. That's why when they do the PET scan and do all those tests, they put sugar in your veins. They give you sugar and it goes straight to the cancer and it lights up. And that's really cool because that's how we can find the cancer. If I knew that sugar feeds cancer cells, why does just a normal oncologist or a normal doctor not know that and tell people to stay away from sugar or do a ketogenic diet?
They do what the system tells them to do. They have called a standard of care for every disease that we are treating, and that must be followed. If you don't follow that, you could lose your license because you're doing something that's not sanctioned by the system. So if the system says cancer is a genetic disease and radiation, I have to be honest with you, we spent billions of dollars on the Genome Project with the promise that we would be able to target specific genes in your cancer and manage it in a precision type of therapeutic strategy. But if cancer is not a genetic disease, that strategy is ultimately not going to work. So it's hard to say that we've spent, 15 years, maybe more, 20, building these incredibly dense genomic maps that we would then hopefully be able to target the cancer and then manage and bring the death rate way down. Well, that has not happened. It's been a big bust. It hasn't worked. We got more cancer today than we've ever had. It's hard to swallow the pill that there's many wasted years in looking at when cancer is not a genetic disease. It's not a genetic disorder. So every cancer cell has hundreds and hundreds of different targetable mutations, and they're all different from one cell to the next. I can explain why many of these new therapies that you hear advertised on television are not working for the majority of people. It's not a mystery. To me, it makes perfect sense. And we're never going to change this if we keep viewing cancer as a genetic disease. The problem is Nobel Prizes have been awarded to scientists who are supposed to have this kind of a knowledge to move the field forward. But that solidification of the academic and pharmaceutical industries around a misunderstanding of what the nature of the disease is ultimately responsible for the failure to move the field forward. So the promise of all this money that we've spent never came. So we continue to use toxic radiation and poisons that we've always used. So we were hoping to get rid of radiation and chemo and use precision medicine, but it's not working. Precision medicine can sometimes kill you faster than the cancer can. Until the cancer is recognized as a mitochondrial metabolic disorder, we're not going to make any major advance in dropping the death rate.
And I've heard you talk about the Inuit people and studies that have been done on people either from the past or current Inuit people that do not have cancer or did not have cancer before. So can you talk about that a little bit, the introduction of the processed foods and so much sugar and all of that?
Well, I think that's where we see that our folks, populations that have been evaluated thoroughly, living according to their traditional ways, whether it was the Inuits or whether it was Aboriginals in Australia or certain tribes in Africa, these folks were rare. Cancer was not a recognized disorder in those groups of people. And they all ate traditional diets from whatever region they were. So where did all this cancer come from? It becomes very clear when the Inuit folks stopped eating their traditional diets and switched to the great American diet and lifestyle. Then they got massively fat, type 2 diabetes, dementia, and cancer. All of these chronic diseases came very, very quickly within a generation or two. And now they're some of the sickest folks on the planet. I had a chance to talk about this at the Thunder Bay Medical School, which services many of the Inuit folks. And they were telling about how incredibly debilitated they are with all these chronic diseases that they never had. So clearly, it's a diet and lifestyle. And that's one of the greatest exports of us. And that creates systemic inflammation, damages oxidative phosphorylation, and then you get dysregulated cell growth, which is cancer. And that also leads to mutations in the genome as a downstream effect. They're not the cause, they're the effect. So targeting effects will never be optimal in trying to manage the disease. You got to keep your mitochondria healthy, and the probability of getting cancer, the risk is significantly lower. We'll eat the same stuff that we eat. If you give them McDonald's hamburgers or Burger King or Taco Bell or a jelly donut, they'll love it. But the problem is you have to take little chimps right after, they're weaned. You have to put them on the great American diet and lifestyle. And you have to see how much the cancer, obesity, and all the things that we have. But when I asked them to do that, I said, do you ever have an experiment? This would be great. They said that would be animal cruelty. The chimpanzee and us are 98% similar in gene and protein sequences. They're our closest biological relative. As a matter of fact, we don't even need to use the chimps because we know what's going to come out. We know what's going to happen. We use the Inuits. And we use these other folks that clearly show when you switch to the American diet lifestyle, you get cancer and fat and demented and all the other things that go along with it. So this is not a mystery. I don't know why anybody thinks this is a big mystery. When you lower the calories into the body naturally adapts to a lower energy. What happens, the tumor cells are locked into a fermentation, which means you have to have large amounts of fermentable fuels in the microenvironment of the tumor to sustain its growth, because fermentation metabolism is a very inefficient way to get energy. And as the result, you have to have a lot of logistic supplies of the fermentable fuels. So as you lower the blood sugar, the tumor cells are more affected. The normal cells switch over to ketones, which is a evolutionarily conserved adaptation. As a matter of fact, our Paleolithic ancestors, those folks, that the hunter-gatherers, would have always been in a state of nutritional ketosis. There were no delicatessens or fast food on every corner in the Paleolithic period. There was none of that. In fact, we didn't even harvest grains. We lived 100,000 years without grains. So grain cultivation in the Neolithic period was the beginning of civilization, where people could build houses and cities around farms, and then you could or grain, and you could keep everybody in one location. You didn't have to go out and track down your dinner every night. There was a lot of exercise, and there was very little carbohydrates in the diet. Consequently, we would rarely, if ever, be in a state of obesity, or let's put it the way, type 2, high glucose levels, unless, of course, a type 1 diabetic or something like this would have happened, and those folks probably would have not survived. So the bottom line is we moved from hundreds of thousands of years in that kind of an existence to an existence around farms, but of course there was still a lot of activity, physical exercise and things to harvest. They didn't have the machinery and things that we have today. So there was always a good degree of exercise, even though we began eating more carbohydrates. And the carbohydrates were not refined and processed. They were all natural from the grains that we ate. So the explosion of cancer, obesity, dementia, all came within the last probably 100 years, as we began to improve our technology and ability to harvest large amounts of food and then process these foods into packages. And it's clear that is your origin. So cancer is part of us. Cancer is the result of how we live our lives. It's not bad luck. It's not any of these kinds of crazy things that you hear the genetics people talk about, but it's our diet and lifestyle that puts us at risk for not only cancer, but all these other things as well.
So we've talked about a ketogenic diet in response to cancer. And do you want to talk a little bit about what a ketogenic diet means for people who may not know about that?
We did that because we worked in the epilepsy field, and we could stop seizures in children with ketogenic diets. That was a substitute for water-only fasting. Water-only fasting will manage seizures, but you can't do it for very long. And cancer can be demolished by water-only fasting if people can do it long enough. But to keep people, we interrogated all these tumor cells, and they can't use fatty acids or ketone bodies. So if you lower your blood sugar and elevate to a different fuel, then the normal cells switch to the new fuel and the tumor cells get hammered. They can't do that. So it doesn't have to be just a ketogenic diet. You can do it with a Mediterranean diet. You can do it with a carnivore diet. You can do it with any diet that will lower glucose and elevate. The issue, of course, is that you have to measure the ratio of blood sugar to ketones in the blood, which is done with a glucose ketone meter. We published the glucose ketone index calculator. It's a way to let patients know whether they're in the right zone to kill tumor cells. The problem is that when people have cancer, they're treated for a lot of different kinds of things that actually make it very hard to get into these new nutritional states. And people have to know that. Radiation and chemo, steroids, and all these kinds of things they give patients, it's very hard to get into the critical ratios that will kill tumor cells, because you're giving therapies that actually raise the very fuels that you're trying to reduce. So this becomes counteractive. This is all so simple if people understood this is a metabolic disorder. It's not a genetic disorder. So why are you giving radiation and chemo to these poor folks? I'm trying to kill cancer cells. Well, they can't grow if they don't have fuels either. So pull the plug on their fuels. They're going to die without toxicity. So why do something that's going to cause all this extra toxicity? And this is, no, we don't talk about this. This is the problem.
Ansel Keys in the 50s and 60s, where he talked about how fat is bad for us and fat is what makes us fat. That was a huge turning point in our history as far as our health goes. Since then, all of our diseases have been on the rise since we started with more grains, more processed foods, more carbohydrates. The ketogenic diet, though, being in a ketogenic state is not a fad diet. I think it gets a bad rap because
I mean, it's the natural ketogenic. Our ancestors during the Paleolithic period had very little access to no processed carbs.
Right.
What carbs would they have? A fruit during the ripe season, but it was always very, very limited. It wasn't excess like we have today. And don't forget, we evolved as a starving species. Humans can go a long time without eating, and as long as they have water, we can live for a long periods of time. And people that are overweight can live even longer. The longest record, Barbary from Scotland, who went to 377 days on water only. Of course, the guy weighed like 450 pounds.
Right.
But that fat is stored energy. It's the energy for the famine. And all of a sudden, in a very short period of time, like an eye blink, you have massive amounts of highly processed carbs and no exercise, sitting in traffic in front of a computer, available to processed foods. The next thing you know, we have all these chronic diseases, which also impacts the nervous system, causing depression and all these other kinds of, that's a whole collateral groups of chronic diseases caused by our diet and lifestyle. So, and you think people would know that, but we have an obesity epidemic. So apparently either they don't care or they don't know about it.
For a ketogenic diet, it's lots of fat, some protein. You can do low carb vegetables, low carb fruits like berries. You just don't want any processed food.
Well, everybody should take their glucose ketone index measurements and let them know. Some guy could eat berries, another guy might not be able to eat berries. We're all different.
So an individual.
And everybody who would want to know if they're in nutritional ketosis, which is about 5.0 or below, that maybe 10. But if you want to kill cancer cells, you got to go to 2.0 or below on the ratio of glucose in the blood to ketones in the blood in a millimolar ratio. And that's available through Keto Mojo, these meters that you can buy on Amazon. They have the free Libra, which is a constant glucose monitor. And once they'll probably get glucose ketone monitors in the future with the technology. So people will always know what level of ketosis they're in at all times. So there's no mystery here. So the vegan wants to get in there, he can get in there. The pescatarian, he wants the carnivore, the Mediterranean guy, doesn't make any difference. And then they'll learn what to eat and how much to eat under whatever diet they happen to prefer.
So for people who say, okay, so you want me to be in nutritional ketosis, which means I'm going to eat more fat than I'm used to eating because I usually, live on carbohydrates. So am I going to be trading cancer? Maybe I'll kill the cancer cells, but do I then get heart disease and have a heart attack or have blocked arteries?
You actually get super healthy. There is a caveat, and I learned that when we worked in the epilepsy field. Every now and then, 1 out of 500 kids just can't stop eating the fat. They love so much ketogenic diet, they get insulin insensitive from it, and their seizures don't get controlled. So if a cancer patient says, "Oh, I just want to eat fat," and the next thing you know, your blood looks milky. We've seen that when the mice and people eat so much fat, your serum looks milky. That ain't healthy. When we say ketogenic diets, carnivore diets, vegan diets, all done in calorie restriction. It's not done by going out and eating 15 avocados. It's like everything is done with the meter. The meter tells us it's a quantitative measure, takes all the ambiguity out. Oh, can I eat this? Everybody should get the glucose, the ketone meter and say, okay, I guess I can't eat that, can I?
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. I have a BioCoach meter that I use a lot. Recently, I had kind of gotten away from it when I was trying to lose the last few pounds a couple of years ago. I was using it a lot so I could keep myself in ketosis and make sure I was eating the right amount of fat, make sure my glucose was down. But then, you go into maintenance mode. I don't have cancer. So for me, it was about healing. It healed a lot of things, but it was about weight loss at the moment. And then I just kind of went away from using it. And I was shocked when I started using it again in the last week or so to realize that I am not in ketosis. I don't know which part I'm doing wrong, but I was not in ketosis.
Yeah, I don't know if it's in our society. I think now that we have so many wonderful, and I'm also not telling people you can't eat a McDonald's or a Burger King or Taco Bell. Those things are very tasty and they can bring enjoyment to a lot of people. I think they just have to always recognize that if you want to stay healthy, you might want to temper a little bit on some of those things or use them as kind of a treat rather than a daily substance, because we know that they're harmful in constant large quantities, because you wouldn't have all these health issues if we were all in a Paleolithic. Now, obviously, during the Paleolithic period, there were a lot of things that could kill us, like an infection, being gored or attacked by an animal or falling off a cliff, or any. We didn't have a lot of the so your longevity on the planet would probably not be as long as it would have been as we have today. But we're living longer, but I don't know if we're living at a healthier state than those previous times. But we certainly know what we should do.
It is possible to eat in a ketogenic state and fight the diseases the fast food direction.
That's absolutely true. But isn't it more pleasurable to be in a happy meal state? Because obviously, if people didn't want to be in that state, you wouldn't have the obesity epidemic that we have. It's obviously easier to eat Happy Meals and do all this other stuff than to sit down and eat an avocado with no cracker. Let's be honest.
That's what I was going to say.
Eat a piece of meat. When people eat a big side of beef, they like to have a potato or something to go along with, a nice piece of bread to sop up the juices with a nice slab of butter on it. Let's be honest. This is not something we're going to shy away from.
Well, in our house, we meat with a side of meat. So we have steak with bacon or steak with beef bacon or something like that. We mix it up. But it is possible to go to fast food restaurants. You just have to do some research. Wendy's, Burger King, Five Guys, McDonald's, they're all 100% beef. So you can go in there and stay in a ketogenic state by getting the burger with the plastic cheese and the bacon even. That's true, but stop it. We're trying to help people here.
Well, I'm just telling you. I mean, this is not, some crazy guy going out. I mean, you ever see those people? Oh, I can't have the bun. And they're always the heaviest weight guys are the ones that are always fearing the bread.
So I went to a party the other day and there was a guy there who I don't know, but I heard him ask, he had a whole plate full of food and pie and biscuits, right? And cornbread. He had all this food and some white potato soup that's white because of all the flour in it. He had all this food. And then he says, do you have any unsweet tea? Do you think it's safe to say that if somebody followed a really good, clean, nutritional ketogenic diet, that they could avoid cancer altogether?
You mean like our Aboriginal folks? The answer is yes. You want to live like an Aborigine or a caveman?
Well, with modern conveniences, yes.
Well, there you go.
It depends on your outlook, right? Like I want to be here for my kids and my grandkids, and so I'm going to do what I need to do.
And then you're right. You can do it. It's not easy, but it certainly can be done. Very hard to get cancer if you live in your natural diet and lifestyle. So even if you have like the monkeys in the zoo, the chimps and the gorillas, they rarely get cancer. In fact, there's never been a documented case of breast cancer in a female chimpanzee. Put it that way. Breast cancer is now taking over heart disease for women. What's going on? The chimpanzee is in the drinking, I don't know. I mean, he's living in the same general environment. There's humans that are living around the zoos where these chimpanzees are. He's breathing the same air as we are. He's living in the same general environment. The only thing different is he's following his diet and lifestyle that he evolved as a species to mostly do, and we're not. We have a study that we've looked at over and over again from South America, where they took these South American macaques or whatever, rhesus monkeys, and they rubbed chemical carcinogen tar on the monkey's arm for 10 years. And then they started to inject these monkeys with the carcinogens. And they got one monkey out of 10 years of all these monkeys that had some small growth. And their conclusion was these monkeys are not good models for cancer. So, I mean, it's hard to get cancer. You really have to beat the crap out of your body, lack of exercise and terrible foods, and well, maybe smoking and drinking and all the other things. Our Aboriginal ancestors rarely, if ever, got cancer. In fact, Albert Schweitzer, the humanitarian, couldn't find 40,000 Africans. He couldn't find any cancer that were living according to their traditional ways. So everything, in my mind, is diet and lifestyle. It's not a genetic disorder at all. How can you manage the disorder if the academic institutions and the medical institutions themselves are not up to date or understand or compliant or even wanting to know this information? There's no conspiracy here.
So if you're watching this video and you want to do one thing to stay healthy, and be around longer, the one thing you can do is cut out processed foods and sugar, then get yourself into nutritional ketosis, especially if you're already sick, if you already have dementia, Alzheimer's,
And
autoimmune
also
disease,
exercise.
cancer.
Make sure you keep that exercise up daily. Aerobic exercise, weightlifting, all this stuff. This is what our ancestors had to do. I mean, they weren't sitting around in the front of a computer or a television screen or sitting in traffic. I mean, they were out working. They had to do things, otherwise they weren't going to starve. They're going to starve to death. So we
Right,
evolved it. We have to be active and we have to have a lifestyle. But that doesn't mean you have to cut out the pleasures
right.
of your life. I just think you have to moderate
Well,
and moderate. That's most humans are not moderate creatures.
or find pleasure somewhere else. Like I'm an abstainer. So
Yeah.
I have to abstain completely from any kind of sugar. The week that I became a carnivore, I had eaten 20 cupcakes in 36 hours. Have to completely stay away from it. So there are other ways to find pleasure. We have just made every single function, every place we go, everything we do about the food. You can do that. Just choose the right foods.
Well, it's not
I
only
mean,
us. You could go to the
right.
zoo and see the happiest days of the existence when they're pounding something down, whatever they're eating. Cows are munching all day long. Everything is like looking for the next big meal.
That's true, but we can choose the right things. We can choose our ancestral appropriate diet.
We'll watch a dog eat. I mean, this dog is like inhaling. I don't think they spend time chewing the food they eat.
What's the best way for early detection that you can think of? Because all the time, we all know somebody who found out they had cancer and then almost right away they were so sick and then they were gone within a few months. How do we protect ourselves against that? Is
Well,
there a way? Are there tests
yeah,
that we
well,
should be doing?
people put the problem off for a long period of time, allowing it to get much worse than it was. At the beginning, when you are first diagnosed, the conditions or the symptomatology may not be so catastrophic. Some people say, God, I went for a checkup and now I find out that I have stage 3 cancer. I never even knew I had this. So your body is strong and healthy. And that's when you attack the metabolic weakness of the tumors at that point, putting patients at risk for poison and toxic poisons that they give to some of these cancer surgical mutilations. Our strategy has been to bring the patient back into a full state of health, shrink down the tumor, and if it can be completely debulked with surgery, I can't say what should be done and what not should be done. I'm not a physician. All I can say that it gives them an opportunity to debulk and cut it out, leading to a potential cure. Shrinking it down, sometimes it goes away completely through non-invasive, like you said, PET scanning, MRI, CAT scan, all these kinds of whatever they use in non-invasive ways of looking at the lump went away or whatever. Or it goes down to a very small lesion, which can be easily surgically removed, either by the surgeon or even from a proton beam radiation, as long as it's on a very focal spot. And there's so many ways to manage cancer without putting the patient at risk for damaging the body, making all these horrific toxic effects, hair loss. Every time I see a bald-headed person who's been treated for cancer, I say the person who's treating them has very little knowledge about the biology of the disorder they're treating, because you're trying to kill cancer cells. And why would hair fall out? Did they think cancer cells are in each hair follicle? Why would your hair fall out? It makes no sense. Well, it stops all dividing cells. Yeah, in your gut, you have a breast lesion or prostate lesion. Why should your gut be blown to pieces and your hair falling out? That speaks to the lack of knowledge on the part of the industry and how to treat cancer. Each person should be their own control in knowing what to do, not these mass groups of people that are all starved to death to manage their. The fact is that we don't know how to treat cancer because that theory under which the disorder is viewed is incorrect. Once you realize it's a metabolic disease, then the strategies are so many non-toxic ways, and each person would be their own control, and determine, oh, you've been diagnosed with potential stage 4 cancer, which means that you are terminal and you're living beyond 10 years. And somebody says, at what point does this thing become terminal or not? Again, your whole view of what and how to manage this disorder must change. Otherwise, we're still caught in the rut. And this is all knowledge base. And we and others have shown clearly that this disorder is a mitochondrial metabolic disorder, and the gene mutations are downstream effects. And most of the treatments today look at targeting the tumor cells rather than the whole body itself, and marginalizing the tumor cells by depriving them of their fermentable fuels. This is not generally known. And the resistance is there's no clinical trials. It's not going to generate the same revenue as the other strategies have generated. So you put all that together, and there's going to be a tremendous resistance in adapting this new approach to managing cancer. So people have to put the pressure on these institutions. The guys that are there are not going, the top guys are not going to make any changes. They're very comfortable in what they look like. They know stuff. You put on a nice white coat and a tie. You walk around with a name tag, makes it look like you know something. But when it comes to, we got 1,700 people a day dying from cancer, obviously. Now, don't get me wrong. We have millions of cancer survivors using standard therapies, right? Called cancer survivors. But many of them pay a huge price. They have all kinds of damage to the brain, the body, hormones, gut disturbances, bone density problems, neuropsychiatric problem, hormonal issues. I mean, of course, that's what's going to happen. If you took any bunch of people and irradiated and poisoned them, you're going to have all kinds of adverse effects if you survive the radiation and poisoning. And then your body will come back and say, oh, I got a different kind of a cancer. I never had this before. Well, damn. I mean, so all this is perfectly understandable and explainable. It's just that, and the folks, listen, scientific literacy is really important. You're living in a technological, scientific age. You don't know jack about this. You're going to be suffering. You're going to pay the price for your lack of knowledge. People, so they better wise up. Otherwise, you're going to be on the end of somebody's inappropriate treatment strategy.
That's right. You got to be your own advocate. That is so important, to do your research. And if your doctor says something that makes you question it, find a new doctor, go get a second opinion.
Yeah, and cancer especially, I think. But, obviously for hip replacements and shoulder replacements and some of these other kinds of procedures, the technological advances have been astounding, I should say. And I think we need to recognize where medicine has really improved our overall health and survival, and where it hasn't. And the cancer field is one of those areas which is medieval in its current practices.
Yeah. And don't just stay with your doctor because you like your doctor or because it was your doctor last time you had cancer. Do your research, question your doctor. And if they get upset with you for questioning them, you should go get a second opinion for sure. Don't you think?
Yeah, it's really it's very uncomfortable situations when you have this nice guy who's very friendly, and then you begin to question his practices, and all of a sudden he doesn't become as friendly, and then you feel bad making him upset.
Right.
So the whole thing is not a healthy.
But this is your health and this is your life. So do the research, learn
and
stuff.
you don't want to. He went to medical school and he did a lot of training and he paid a lot of money to go this, and now all of a sudden you're questioning what he's doing, and he feels upset and you feel embarrassed and he's embarrassed. I mean, it's not a good thing, and it shouldn't be that way.
Right.
But the patients, he should be knowledgeable enough to say, listen, we're not going to deny, if somebody wants radiation and toxic poison, they're not going to be denied. If people say, listen, doc, poison and radiate me as much as you can, and I'll see if I survive. We're not going to, they already do that, actually. That's what they do. That's the norm, actually. But it doesn't have to be that way. That's my point here. And we have the solid research that we've done to show it does not have to be that way. We have not only people, but preclinical studies all showing that you can manage cancer. I don't say cure cancer, I say manage cancer. You can improve overall survival and quality of life significantly over what we're currently doing. Does a person is cured of it? Who knows? They should be just thankful they're living longer than they were predicted to live, and their quality of life is good. That's what they should be happy about that. Oh, give me a cure for cancer. Listen, the person curing for cancer comes from a combination of diet, drug, lifestyle, and what that person is capable of doing. Okay. And we don't throw out all standards of care. These standards can be used in appropriate times at the right place, timing and scheduling. Some of the immunotherapies that we hear advertised could be very effective as a last part of the treatment rather than at the beginning. So everything is there. We just have to know how to use all the tools that are available.
Yeah, this is a great place to wrap it up. Dr. Seyfried, thank you so much. It was such good information you gave us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Awesome. So until next time, be well, be safe, and I'll see you next time here on the Carnivore Revolution.